Father Castle, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about our conversation. And you help stuck souls cross over. And I want to hear more about that and all about that. But can you define for our listeners what the Catholic Church teaches about the afterlife after we die? What happens?
Well, the main thing is the Easter morning message that's common to all the Christian churches that the 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 one who died a brutal, violent death 3 days ago is alive and wants to see you, wants to be with you. And we don't believe that's true just of the person of Jesus, but we believe he's the template showing us what we are, that we are the kind of being that survives its death and goes on to other ways of being. So that's essential. But the little clientele that my prayer partners and I have worked with over the last 30 years are people mostly who died suddenly and violently in ways that they couldn't have expected. And so without any of the kind of preparation that might come when one knows one has an illness that might mean your death, some people are just so jolted at the time that it happens that they need something immediately afterwards. And for a while afterwards, that's a kind of an opportunity to regroup.
Hmm, interesting.
And for some of those, it can be traumatic and they can make it worse by the way they think of it, that they blame themselves for something or furious about what happened or feel cheated that they didn't, for example, get to finish raising their kids and now I'm dead.
Right.
Um, there can be a lot of different ways and people just are so different from one another. I don't know why we would expect that each of us is going to die in the same way or
Right.
or respond to our deaths in the same way. So there are some people that kind of spin their wheels and don't make any progress towards healing and wholeness because of some, I don't know, some just kind of contrary belief that they get stuck in you might know, or people in your audience might know somebody right now who is kind of grinding away in their life because they just can't get past something,
Right.
especially a trauma. And
Right.
sometimes that trauma pain worsens into drug or alcohol abuse that is an attempt to deal with pain and only makes matters worse. And so for some people in the afterlife, they're just in some sort of looping way of being until they're not,
Right.
until that something changes.
And so I may be thinking about this the wrong way, so please correct me, but it almost seems like or I guess the question I have is, what is our consciousness afterwards? Because the way that you're speaking about this almost sounds like, me getting stuck on something. So w- when you're crossing over from life as we understand it to the afterlife, and you're talking about people who sort of may blame themselves or are stuck in that cycle, do you, do you have an understanding of where they are or where their consciousness is?
Well, I think our consciousness, classically, Catholics would call that your soul. I live on the campus of the University of Arizona, and it's a place that's one of the world leaders in consciousness studies.
Hmm.
There's a whole academic way of approaching this that doesn't necessarily use religious language about the science of it and the physics of it. And your question about where are they? Well, that's a physics question.
Right.
What's that space like, or is it space, and so on. I'd have to say that many of these things are a mystery, even though I've been working with this odd ministry for about 30 years. It seems to me that there's spaces that are analogous to the spaces on the radio band.
Mm,
It's one thing going through our rooms, but if you have the right receptor and you turn the knob, you can go from, you know, Mexican mariachi music to talk radio to a baseball game. All that's happening in your room. All you had to do was turn the dial.
yeah.
And and some of it involves space because sometimes you can pick up a signal from a distant radio station.
Right.
So I think of it as something like that. Jesus taught that, and I'm a Catholic Christian priest, and Jesus taught that the kingdom of heaven is in your midst. And so, on the one hand, if God's everywhere, there are a lot of very, very far away places where God must be. but right in front of you is a place too. And even the inside of you, however much space, how much you weigh, however much space your body takes up is also a place where your interior organs are. God is in there too, if God's everywhere. So I just think that there's a space that's not exactly here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that when people die, they can't access us, because oftentimes they do.
That's so interesting. And I love how you describe that. If God is everywhere, well, God is infinite, right? If the universe is infinite, God is
Yes.
infinite. And the
Yes.
radio station's a great analogy. So, how, what was your calling to the priesthood? And then what was your first experience with this particular work that you're doing?
Well, I grew up in Southeast Texas. I'm from Port Arthur, Texas, and I grew up in an adjacent town of Groves, Texas, in a very Catholic family. I was born in 1956. I'm 69 years old. So I grew up kind of conventionally Roman Catholic,
Mhm.
except that most Catholics don't have two nuns for aunts. I did. My dad had two siblings and both became Dominican first grade teachers. They belong to the order that for anybody that's looking at this and rather than listening, I'm wearing my Dominican habit. And my mom was very devout and a very good teacher of the faith to a child. My dad was a practicing Catholic. So I had a strong early childhood, not just teaching me about regulations and commandments and things, but spiritual practice,
Mhm.
about spiritual communion. I knew that I had a family on earth and a family in heaven.
Mhm.
And mostly heaven was another place that you go after you die, but not exactly, because you can talk to your heaven family right now and
Mhm.
they can hear you. So and then I learned that how old were you, Megan, when you learned about death? That death is a thing that animals undergo.
I would guess around 5 or 6. I think
Yeah.
that's when I really understood it.
Yeah, you must have if you didn't have a relative that died, you must have seen a dead bird on the sidewalk or a
Hmm.
pet die or something.
Right.
And so, or you drive past a cemetery or a mortuary. I remember, actually, I thought Jesus was buried on the corner of Twin City Highway and 39th Street because it was the corner of the cemetery where my grandparents and my parents' bodies now are. But he had the best plot, the one right on the corner. And it was that big statue that you sometimes see depicted in art of Jesus leaning against this rock on Holy Thursday when he's about to be arrested. And I remember asking my mom, "Is that where Jesus is buried?" And she said, "No, you remember he didn't even stay in his tomb very long. He didn't use it. He got out of it."
That's so sweet. Oh my goodness.
I still think of that when I go home and drive past that corner. Anyway, I knew about death and about well, I learned that there were kind of three afterlife places that you could go when you die, and they were kind of like countries in the sky.
Hmm.
Mexico, the US, and Canada, and you went to one or the other. And
Right.
except one was bad and one was good and one was in between.
Hmm.
And, but they were extremes. One was very, very good, like perfect people. One was terrible. And the other one was, what seemed to me would be the most populated one,
Hmm.
purgatory, Catholics called it. But if you were in purgatory, it was like an extension of heaven. It was like, I don't know, like Puerto Rico. It's not exactly a state, but it's kind of.
Yeah.
Uh, and or Washington D.C. maybe. Anyway, I was learning about these afterlife states, and I learned that only Catholics believe there was this one in the middle, this
Right.
purgatory we called it, and we could pray for our people that went there after they died to hurry them through it. It was like getting dressed for church or something. You had to get cleaned up. To
Right.
purge means to cleanse. So I was praying very early on because I was told I could. And one of my aunts told me right before First Communion, God hears everybody's prayers, but the prayers of children go straight to God's heart. While you won't be a child for very long, so don't waste your short childhood. Pray for everybody you can think of while you're a child. And then I learned that we could advance people in purgatory by praying for them. And so we used to get a newspaper in the morning and one at night. And once I was able to figure out obituaries, I would read to the bottom for what church their funeral was at. Because in the early 60s, nobody had a funeral except at a church. Even if they didn't attend that church, their funeral service was held there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd look for anybody that wasn't Catholic because I figured if they're Catholic, their family ought to be praying for them. It's not my business. But if you were a Protestant, nobody's praying for you. And so I'll take that one. So I would go to bed. I'd take the obituaries to bed with me. And I would talk to the people and say, "Hello, I'm going to pray for you so that you get to cut in the line." I thought of it as like, like when you go to the bank and there's a whole bunch of people there. There's six teller windows and three people working, and then there's those little velvet ropes that go down.
Right.
I just thought I would be like customer service in purgatory, and I would say, "Hey, Megan, would you like a cut? Would you like to go?"
That's a lot of pressure for a kid. That's like,
I didn't feel it like pressure. I was
oh,
just
good.
told that if yours was the prayer that got sprung somebody from purgatory into heaven, that they would be you would have a friend for all eternity.
No, I like that. Yeah.
So I thought, well, there must be somebody that's one who's aggravatingly close to getting into heaven and only needs one prayer. So I'll
Hmm.
pray for the low-hanging fruit. I'll take that one. And then the whole line would move up, and then I'd pray for anybody that just got there because nobody wants to go into a place and find that there's a long line.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I would pray for the ones in between, and I'd fall asleep doing that. So I did that all through childhood. And then this other manifestation happened in my early 40s when people began coming to me in a dream.
Mm.
That's what these three books are about.
And you had two nuns in your family who were Dominicans or are Dominicans. I
Mhm.
guess it never ends, but is that why you went into the Dominican order, or is there a particular, I guess, is there a particular calling of the Dominicans that also resonates with you?
It's funny because I'd never met any Dominican men. I only know the sisters, and I knew a lot of the sisters because my grandmother lived next door, and her house was a place where a lot of them would go, you know, just to hang out. When they were all dressed in the full habit and everything,
Yeah.
my childhood was full of lots of Dominican sisters. I didn't know the friars, that's what we call ourselves. But later I learned that they were well educated and I wanted a good education. I didn't want a PhD, and the Jesuits usually make you get a PhD.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to join any really small orders that I hadn't heard of because I was afraid that during my lifetime there seemed to be a shortage, and I didn't want to be the only one, closing down institutions or something.
Yeah.
Uh, and when I learned that Saint Dominic, the founder, was known as the Joyful Friar, I thought that sealed the deal. I wanted to be a joyful, and I wanted to spread joy, and I also have a podcast, and that's what it's called, the Joyful Friar.
Yeah. And so you were in your 40s when you first had this experience. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, there were a couple of times earlier in my early 20s when I was in a very intense spiritual discernment time, and the Holy Spirit reached out to me and let me know some things. And one of them was that I had a gift of what I call prophecy, one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit that St. Paul talks about in the New Testament. You know how if for any of you in your audience who go to synagogue or to any Christian service, very often we have a reading from what Christians would call the Old Testament.
Hmm.
And very often it's from a prophet, maybe Isaiah, for example. And the reader might have a section of a text to read, and it might start with a narration voice, where the prophet Isaiah was going from this town to that town. Then he got there and said, "Hi, my name is Isaiah." And and then before long, he's not only speaking his voice, but God is speaking through him. Thus says the Lord, I want you to stop oppressing the poor. So you have to teach the reader how to inflect their voices three different ways to bring that story alive. Well, I had had God speak through me, borrowing my voice twice in my early 20s, so I knew the phenomenon, and I knew that it didn't need to be thought of as something of the devil. We wouldn't be reading that at church. So it happened that I knew another friend who had that gift, and we were prayer partners. We were on a retreat in northern Arizona. I was working at Arizona State University at its campus ministry, and I was with a group of about 20 people who went up north into the mountains for a weekend retreat. We had done the Friday night thing, and I just went to bed and was planning to get up early with the coffee with the people that go running. I wave goodbye to them as they run, sit near the coffee pot. But in the middle of the night, I had this dream that was unlike any dream I'd ever had before. It wasn't my dream material. It was somebody else calling out to me in a dream, showing me them burning to death in a fire.
Mm.
And I woke up from it feeling like I was being paged. When maybe there are younger people in your audience that don't even know what a pager is.
They do not know what it is.
Well, okay, for younger people, it's when you go to the restaurant and they hand you one of those things that buzzes and lights up when your table's ready. It's a little like that.
Right.
But You before cell phones, you
You got a
might
notification.
you got a notification, yeah. And I used to have to take a turn being the on-call priest for the hospital. Maybe Tuesday night would be your night, and if the pager went off on the nightstand, you had to suddenly rouse yourself, talk on the phone, get data about the person's name, the room number, the nurse's station stuff. Anyway, this I was on this retreat and I had this dream about a man burning to death on a car from the late 50s, the kind with fins and lots of chrome. He was sitting on the radiator with the hood up, facing away from the car. He hadn't been in a wreck, but he died on the engine of a car.
Mm.
I hadn't any idea what would have prompted that, but it was very vivid. And he was angry and screaming, not just because he was on fire, but he was angry at the same time. I got all that was communicated in the dream. I woke up and I just said a prayer quickly. I introduced myself to whoever it was and said, "My name's Nathan. You found me. In the morning, I'll figure out how we can help you. But right now, I'm going to go back to sleep. So God
Mhm.
bless you. See you in the morning." When I got with my friend in the morning, I said, "This thing happened in the night. Can we find a quiet place and go into prayer and see what this is all about?" We were no more than 2 or 3 minutes into quiet prayer, and we were prayer partners already, so this was not strange to us necessarily, prayer at least. And we were just still, and she said, "Whoever this man is, he really wants to talk to you. Is it okay if I let him do so?" And I knew she could. She could allow her voice to be borrowed. Commonly, that gets called channeling, which sets off all kind of radioactive signals inside the church. It's a upsetting word, so I don't use it to refer to myself or to my friend. But we had protected ourselves by encircling ourselves with Saint Michael the Archangel, with the persons of the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, including Jesus, Mary, Saint Dominic. We made sure that we were surrounded by holy protectors, and then said, "Go ahead." And out of her voice came a guy saying, "Who the hell does he think he is, taking me just when my life's getting good?" And that was the voice of Ray, who is the first story in book one of the three books that I've written on this topic.
Wow.
So they had to help Ray.
Yeah, wow. 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 And when you had that dream, you you could discern that it was different than anything you had experienced
I've
before
never burned to death on the engine of a car. I had no reason to be dreaming about that. It felt like the phone rang and this was on the other end of it.
on the other end. Yeah, that's really interesting. And can you explain what a prayer partner is?
Yeah, someone with whom you're close enough in a trusting friendship that you can pray from your heart out loud in their presence and feel respected.
Mhm,
That you can share your prayer life with another person rather than just do that using only ritual prayers or formal services or something.
mhm. And then when you pray for these individuals, is it one session or is it multiple sessions
In the
that you're
case of
praying?
Ray, he was our very first one almost 30 years ago. And it did take several sessions as we were figuring out how to do things. And he's the only one. There's been about 600 since then, and nobody's taken more than about 40 minutes.
Wow.
That what we found is that the way that we've been brought onto the team, if you will, is that there are always people who either died in a traumatic way or who experienced a trauma earlier in their life from which they never really recovered before they died. So something unresolved is still bothering them in the afterlife. And usually it's not a slew of things, it's some event that they just couldn't get through, couldn't get their way past.
Yeah,
And it's usually traumatic. So anyway, we've learned that the ones who come to us are vetted. They're being cared for by a team, and they've moved from the trauma of their death or whatever they needed to heal from. And mostly it's a coming to truth. I would imagine that you and others in your audience have had some experience of lying to yourself somewhere along the line,
sure.
having some sort of an idea about events in your life or people in them that is not completely true. And then one way of talking about that is that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Even if you know that my story might be flawed or over exaggerated or something, that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Well, sometimes people do that to their own detriment. and they avoid the truth, and they decide that this other story that they tell themselves is the truth. And there's really no substitute for the truth.
Hmm.
You can make stuff up and call it true if you want to, but that won't help you. That won't make you whole.
Right.
And so sometimes the people have moved through some process in the afterlife with the help of others. One really important one is their guardian angel. Now, not everybody would use the word guardian angel, but other people would say spirit guide, light being.
Hmm.
I've traveled in circles with a lot of people that are interested in consciousness, and that's certainly not unique to Catholics or Christians. So, like the International Association for Near-Death Studies is a group I've belonged to for a number of years. And when you go there, you hear everybody's everything. You've
Hmm.
got all kind of cosmologies all in the same room. So, but anyway, the guardian angels stay with you until you don't need them anymore. And they get you through. And one of the things they'll point out is, yes, I know you died in a car crash, but I wasn't allowed to intervene. You might say, what kind of guardian angel did I have that let me die in a fire? Well, I did what I could. It's like being a parent. You can't chase your children all through their life and protect them from every last thing. All you can do is do your best. And the guardians will stay on and they'll help people move towards truth and fullness. And then when they're the ones that my team and I work with, they've moved through a healing process and come to truth. And now they don't, it's like being the discharge staff at a medical center.
Hmm.
You don't need to be here any longer because this is intended for people who need more help than you do. You might not be a picture of health, but you don't need this. So
Right.
you go on to the next level, and we're there at the door. They show up in a dream and show me the basics of how they died or the event that got them stuck, traumatized. But they're ready to move. They don't need much from us. They just need a little gentle uh, escort out the door. Sometimes somebody coming for them that welcomes them into the next part of their afterlife.
Right. It sort of sounds like you're a concierge, like moving
A little
them
bit like
through.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, something you just said, and we don't have to talk about this if it's not something you don't want to talk about, but something you just said sparked something in me of your guardian angel, and I couldn't intervene in the car crash. But it seems to me the idea that just sparked me is the guardian angel is there for your soul, not the physical portion of yourself. And one of the questions that we all have is, well, why did this thing happen? Like, why do
Yeah.
kids die of cancer? And I'm so sorry, what was the gentleman's name who you're
Ray is the
Ray?
first
So,
name.
why was Ray in this terrible accident? Why did God allow this?
Yes.
And, and when we ask that, are we thinking about it too much in the almost how I started of like, where is this space, right? Like, are we thinking about it too much in the physical versus the spiritual?
Well, there's a whole lot in what you've just asked. There's multiple questions in there, but one of them would be, can the guardian angels, did they only care about your soul and not your body? Well, no, because you're a unit. While we're embodied, our body and our soul are important.
Hmm.
And there are times when they are allowed to do some sort of intervention. One of them once told me most of us have changed a tire. you know Somebody who showed up and you thought that was my guardian angel, or
Yeah.
you're such an angel. Some of it they'll say we're able to materialize and to do something once in a while, and many of us have had that experience. But then there are other times where it's just above our pay grade, where we're allowed to do this but not that.
Hmm.
uh,
Interesting.
Even Jesus on the cross, if you remember, people taunted him and said,
Save yourself. Yeah, like
"Hey,
it's,
oh, yeah,
yeah.
and if you knew who I was, you'd know I could, a whole army of angels could be here to help me, but that wasn't the plan that day."
Right. Right.
So, but no, they care about the whole of you, and that's why they stay on if you still need some guidance and get to a place where you're really comfortable and free. And then after that, sometimes they'll say that they have a decision to make. Do they want to? They always want to serve the Lord in the kingdom. And and again, I'm using the language of a Catholic Christian
Sure.
priest, but sometimes they'll say, "Well, I think they want me to take some sort of an angelic vacation. I think this was a hard one. The person I guarded this time had a difficult ending, and I think they'd like me to take a break."
Hmm.
But then there's always the next opportunity to serve. And remember, they're eternal beings anyway. So finishing things is like finishing a chapter in the middle of a book. You
Right.
keep going on to the next thing.
Right.
They're delightful to work with, and they're happy to, and they're as different from one another as human persons are. They're some of them can be quite sober and task oriented. Others just want to play. That they can just be all over the map.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And I have so many questions, so sorry if I'm sort of bebopping around here, but how does the work that you do fit in, and you touched on this in the beginning, but how does the work that you do fit in with the doctrine or the theology of the Catholic Church? And eh, in purgatory, well, I guess you did answer because what you're doing is you're moving them forward and through that prayer. Do you does this experience ever stick with you? Like when you finish with a soul, is it done or?
Oh no, it's even though we might not engage people for very long, it's very intimate and intense what we're
Mhm,
getting to do. And it's not that different because I'm a priest, I'm also a confessor. And so sometimes a stranger will walk into a confessional with me and I'm hearing their most tender private thoughts.
mhm,
So it's not that different. And we never tell any of their stories aloud in public in a book or on a podcast without going back to them one more time to get their permission to
mhm,
use their story. And we record the sessions on an app on my phone, and it you hit a button when you're finished, and AI turns it into a Word document in about 2 minutes.
mhm.
And so I've got the transcripts of our conversations because I wanted the reader and or possibly future researchers to have a database to work with that was as close to the experience as I could provide. And they the when we do go back and ask their permission, we've only twice had a little bit of hesitation over whether to use a assumed name or not. You know how a lot of literature says the names have been changed to
Right.
protect someone's privacy? Well, there's been a couple that are public that where we changed the names, largely because they died recently enough that they had survivors who might be offended or wounded by learning more about how they died.
Yeah.
But they often end up giving us a kind of an update. I've never spoken to you before, but if you invited me back on your show 6 months from now, don't you suppose we'd do a little bit of catching up
Of
on
course.
going on before we get down to business? That's
Right.
just what we do. So there's usually some banter at the front end, and one of the natural questions is, so what have you been doing? What's new? What did you do after we saw you last?
Yeah.
And then they'll give us cool kind of updates into things that are kind of like orientations. Did you ever go to college and show up for some first thing or, you know, where or you walk into a hotel and while the other person's getting the room arrangement thing, you might be looking at the brochure rack with the little pamphlets about the steam
Right.
train or the hot air balloon ride. They have so many options of things that they could do, and many of them want to learn.
Hmm.
And I love learning. I've been on a campus since I was 5 years old. There's lots of things to learn, and there's the joy of learning and of being with other people that want to learn what you want to know. So a lot of people get really engaged in wanting to know something, sometimes so they can be helpful.
Right.
For example, I didn't get into his story, but we asked him, the very first guy, how can we help you?
Yeah.
Uh, just seemed like the most natural question in the world. And he said, my wife, my wife. He had died 40 years earlier, and now
Wow.
his wife's in his 60s. He died when he was 20.
Wow.
They got pregnant the senior year in high school, had the baby was a year and a half. They rented a house, and he started an auto repair business with a friend, and that's where he died in his
Mm.
shop. But he said, my wife, she married up. She married her lawyer and moved to South Carolina. They didn't have any more kids, but she's dying of cancer now. And I've been watching her all this time. And I want to greet her when she passes, but I can't the way I am.
Mm.
So that was the dilemma for him. So we needed to help him figure out, well, you're probably going to have to change. Is that okay? Because a lot of people don't want to change.
Right.
They're perfect the way they are. Get ready to change because you've already if what you've been doing for 40 years is going to work, you wouldn't be calling on us.
Right.
So, and we're going to probably have to make you hurry because cancer's got its own schedule and you've had 40 years of just about nothing.
Right.
Uh,
So it almost sounds like some of these sessions are like confession.
that well, the first one was in it was more like counseling.
Hmm.
It was counseling confession have in common that people share a confidence that they
Right.
probably wouldn't share in another context. Um, but and these aren't, and we have the seal of confession where we don't dare divulge something that was said during the confessional. But
Of course.
sometimes if you're having a counseling session with someone and they say, "Would you mind hearing my confession?" We have to draw a very clear line between everything you just said and what you say inside confession so that I don't go out and talk about it.
Right.
I don't disclose something I heard only in confession. But anyway, it has that element to it. But in his case, he needed to calm down. And he was angry at God because he had been taught that the reason that people die is because God takes them.
Mm-hmm.
So God is now this body snatcher and this eye in the sky that burned him to death in a car. Well, who the hell does he think he is? And
Hmm.
why would you want to be with that person for all eternity?
Right.
So he needed to change that thought, and then he needed to move. I said, and you've been nowhere except in this like cave you created 40 years ago. So we called on his dad and said, how about your dad taking you for a walk? And he agreed to that. So they went and looked at cars, he said.
Hmm.
He didn't, his dad died when he was 10 and he didn't know him very well, but they found a way. This is all in the first book. It's in a lot of detail. But then eventually he did come back and tell us the last time we talked, or the second to last time, big news, my wife passed. And so tell us all about it. Well, it's kind of like you said. There was a few of us. I told him that I thought the reason he couldn't be with her or greet her was because he acted like a caveman every time he mentioned her. It sounded like he owned the rights to her,
Hmm.
and that when she got there, he was going to pull her into his cave by her hair. And I just said, if you're probably not the only person that loves this woman. You're the only dead husband and the only person she ever had a child with. So you are a big deal, no
Hmm.
question. Just don't make yourself the whole thing. Can you imagine being with a few people? I don't suppose the minute you die that you're in a surprise party with a cast of thousands. It would seem like you'd kind of be eased into the afterlife bit by bit, maybe. And so I just said, imagine that maybe it's just a few of you, but you belong, and just be a gentleman. And eventually he said, well, she passed. And I said, well, tell us about it. And he said, kind of like you said, there weren't very many of us because there shouldn't be when someone's just died. But she crossed and I got to be there and greet her. And I said, well, that's our purpose then. It's time to say goodbye, I think. And you go off and do what you need to do. And I said, well, Ray, before you go, you know now how to watch people because you did it for 40 years. You now know how to greet people when they pass because you just proved it. So I know those two things about you to be true. So I want to ask you this favor. Would you mind watching me until it's time for me to die? And when I do, would you be there to greet me? And he said, why, sir, I'd be most honored. Just look for the perfect gentleman.
Oh.
So we called that story Ray the Perfect Gentleman.
Mm.
When they got the ball rolling.
Wow.
And then he
And
went on. When we got permission to use his story, he told us that I never liked school, and school didn't like me. They were always trying to teach me things I didn't know, didn't want to know. And he said, now there's something I don't want to know. I helped one person, my wife, cross and welcomed her, and now I want to know more about it and get better at it. So
mm,
it said, I signed up for a class. I'm going to a school now where people are taught how to do this and do it well.
wow. This is so interesting.
Isn't
This
it?
is
I think
so
so.
interesting. And do people in our lives that we know or maybe don't know have the ability to contact us in this living realm?
Oh, you probably have lots of people in your circle that have some story to tell you about something that they think might have been contact of one kind or another.
Right.
Some of it is in dreams. I just have a friend whose mother is dying, and are you familiar with the idea of near-death visitation?
No.
It's a phenomenon for example, in at deathbeds, when there's a vigil and when it's understood that somebody is about to die soon, very often in the last day or day and a half, a person, if they're still verbal, will be trying to talk or trying to visit, and then they'll say, "Oh my God, Mom is here," and they'll be having to navigate the fact that somebody flesh and blood is standing in front of them, and right behind them is Mama, and and they're both real and they're both present. They're just present in different ways, and it's visual to them or even auditory. Anyway, that's a whole field. There's a lot of children can be very sensitive this way.
Hmm.
Sometimes children know their grandparents died before anybody told them.
Hmm.
The grandparents will buzz through their bedroom at night and they'll say, "Grandma was here." Or there's lots of different ways in which, and the Catholic tradition is full of the mystical tradition where there's a lot of the saints that had all kind of out of body stuff, reading souls. There's just a whole lot of phenomenology that's part of the Catholic Christian story. Even the Jesus story that's common to all Christians, for crying out loud, he shows up 3 days later.
Yeah,
And they talked to him back and forth, and he said, "You got anything to eat?"
right.
I just think this tradition is full of these kinds of things.
Right. Yeah, and touching the,
And touching the
the
wounds.
the palms and yeah, wow. It's funny because when I first learned about what you did, it's not that I thought like you were doing anything wrong or heretical or whatever against the teaching of the
Some
Catholic
people do,
Church.
you know.
Well, I'd like to hear more about that. I didn't feel that way, but it's growing up Catholic, I always kind of laugh. I was like, man, we talk about death a lot. Like we think about death a lot
Uh-huh.
in the Catholic faith. But I never thought about this. I knew about prayer. I knew about praying. My great aunt was a nun, big Catholic family. You pray for yourself and others and the whole world. And I never thought about this portion of it. But as you're talking about it, it's like it was right there all along,
Yeah, yeah.
in the teachings. Now, for those when you get pushback or if people have called this heretical, what is the challenge for them? What are
They
they upset
usually
with?
use the word necromancy. Do you know
Mm.
that word?
Yes, but can you explain it?
Well, necro is just a prefix that means having to do with death or dying. Like necrotic tissue is
Hmm.
something that some part of the body that where the tissue has died. And mancy has to do with trying to gain an advantage through secret information. So a necromancer is someone who is calling on someone who has died, trying to make contact with them in order to gain knowledge of something secret.
Mm,
Tomorrow's lottery numbers, something about a will,
right.
anything like that. At the end of my third book, there's an expert in this field. His name is Jimmy Aiken. He works for a group called Catholic Answers out of San Diego. Very, very, very bright man. He goes into a lot of detail about what Scripture says about these kind of practices and where it's forbidden, why it's forbidden, and and then goes into the detail about what I and my prayer partners do and said, here's why this is not that. Here's why Father Nathan is not doing necromancy.
Right.
And his thing hinged upon me not contacting people being waited to be contacted. So one thing I don't do is if people listen to this podcast and they get all excited and want to fire off an email to me, we'll provide the way to do that. I won't contact your grandmother.
Hmm.
I'm not going to bring through people or bring messages and so on. There are other people who do that. Usually they're called mediums.
Hmm.
And then there's a whole other ethical issue about when can that ever be acceptable in the Christian churches? And then, of course, there wouldn't be so many Christian denominations if they agreed about everything.
Well, that's true.
They
Fair
just
point.
agree about lots of things and keep splitting and splitting,
Yeah.
or fighting inside of an organization like the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's never happened.
yeah. So people say, "Well, what's the Catholic Church think about what you do?" And I'll say, "Well, we're right now somewhere around 1.4 billion people, so
There's a few opinions.
yeah, there's more than one opinion. But the most important opinion is that of my immediate religious superior because I took a vow of obedience.
Hmm.
And under our obedience, we don't even publish a book without it being pre-read by
Hmm.
our credential
Hmm.
or somebody that he assigns to do that task. So I've never printed anything that I didn't have approved. Even that does not enough to satisfy some people, but that's kind of the way the world is, you know.
Right.
You
Right.
can't run around making everybody like you or approve of whatever it is you do.
Right.
I just do what I do.
Yeah. Can you talk about your books?
I sure can. There's three of them. They're called Afterlife Interrupted, the first one was called Helping Stuck Souls Crossover, because back when I wrote that in 2018, it seemed like I had a lot of people early on that were spinning their wheels, it felt like, not struggling and not making any progress because of re some unrelenting idea. One, for example, was a man named Hal. Are you old enough to remember when seatbelts first came into cars?
I was the beneficiary of those before me, but my brother is that age. Yeah.
Well, when there was a law and you were forced to wear your seatbelt, and then it was against the law, and they built into cars buzzers that when you sat on the seat and you didn't buckle the seatbelt, it would buzz, and it wouldn't stop buzzing until you buckle the belt.
Right.
People used to buckle them and sit down on the buckle. But anyway, there was a guy named Hal who was on his way home from work. He called himself a weekend dad. He'd been divorced, and he was going above the speed limit along with everybody else. And it was raining on a road where the bridge hadn't been widened, but the road had. They
Mm,
came to a narrow, and he hit the bridge abutment and rolled and died.
mm,
And the last thing he remembered was feeling like he was inside a dryer. It was tumbling and tumbling and tumbling, and he was hitting against the all the insides of his car because he didn't buckle his seatbelt. And then he landed in his afterlife kicking himself that he didn't buckle his seatbelt. And he just was a bad, bad boy. And he wouldn't let up. He would just keep returning to that thought that, damn it, if I'd only buckled the seatbelt, I wouldn't have died. And he left small children and whatever. And his guardian finally got to him and just said, you keep thinking that thought, and every time you do, it has the same outcome. Do you want to be unhappy for all eternity? Not because of sin, but because of an unrelenting, persistent idea.
yeah.
And he was blaming himself. And he just say, yeah, that's true. I really did that. I really did an irresponsible thing. I should have buckled the seatbelt. Can you forgive yourself in order to go on? And
Hmm.
eventually he got to that place, and the key that turned in the lock was his guardian saying, do you want to be unhappy for all eternity? Because you're on your way to doing that.
Right.
And
Right.
so that was an example of someone being stuck. All he really needed to do was change his mind about something. I'm a preacher, and I often will ask a congregation, when's the last time you changed your mind about something important? And in our politics right now, the reason it's so hard to talk to anybody at Thanksgiving or bring up anything political is because people just feel like being asked to change their mind about anything is such an affront to the ego. You
Hmm.
must disrespect me if you think I need to change my mind.
Right.
Well, okay. If that's the way you want to be.
Right.
But to learn is to have changed your mind a lot.
Right.
You know, people don't learn if they arrive, on day one of school thinking they know as much as the teacher. You must have had been a classroom with that person before. They're really hard to be around.
Yes.
That know-it-all that
Yes.
doesn't need to be taught. So anyway, sometimes the people are stuck just because they they form an idea and they think because they formed it, it has to be true.
Mm.
Well, no, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
Right.
And you'll still be you, and you'll still be lovely even after you change your mind.
Right. Right. And where did that thought come from?
Yeah.
And so you've written three books. That was the
They're all,
first
yeah, they're
book.
all called Afterlife Interrupted. And for those that are looking at this on YouTube or wherever you
Hmm.
post it visually,
Yeah.
they look the same.
Hmm.
Uh, they're colorful. They have hands, at the top and at the bottom. We're kind of reaching across. There's books one, two, and three. The second one, we kept the same graphics, but we got rid of the word stuck
Hmm.
because we realized that some people weren't stuck. They were just in a place where they needed intensive care
Mm.
because they died in a way that was awful. And then the last one, the subtitle is Afterlife Interrupted. Book three is Please Let Me Explain, because we just sometimes the prayer partners and I, when we're finished a session or even while we're in one, we're going, wow, I never thought of that.
Mm.
I never realized. You've kind of said that a time or two in this conversation.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are just so good at explaining what they went through that we think, wow, that could really benefit people to know about that. One guy was he do you remember the Far Side, Gary Larson
Yes.
cartoons? They often didn't have a caption. Sometimes they did, but they were usually not a strip, but they were just one panel. And one of his most famous ones was depicted, I think it's a 2 or 3 story brick building that must have been swept away by a flood because it's in a river.
Hmm.
flowing down a river. It's on fire and it's about to go over a waterfall. And on the outside of it, the sign just says Crisis Center. There's every conceivable crisis happening right this second at the
Yeah.
crisis
Everything all at once. Yeah.
all at once. Well, this guy he was about 23, 24 years old. His name was Anthony. He was from a big, loud, raucous Italian family. You're from the East, aren't you?
Yes.
Jersey or somewhere back there?
I know a few of those families. Yeah.
Yeah, and he just said, all of my aunts and uncles do nothing but fight one another all the time. And they all had small businesses. They were, they ran a laundry or they had some shop or whatever, and everybody was trying to recruit him to be on their team.
Yeah.
And he said, these family businesses, you start working when you're about 10. As soon as you can lift a box, you're in the back room doing something.
Sure.
And he said they were all trying to recruit me, and I thought this could be hell on earth. I could have to listen to all that carping about who got mad because somebody skipped out on Nana's 90th birthday, or somebody got drunk at the wedding, or
Right. Right.
somebody had too much to eat at the Thanksgiving. He said they just wouldn't let up. They fought each other all the time. So he said I wasn't going to commit to any of that. So he found his own job as working on an oil crew in refineries and oil fields in the Northeast. And he said they would pile us into a 15 passenger van and then they would send us to a job site. And it was a different job site every day.
Mhm.
They got inside a refinery and the guy that was driving the van he'd never driven one before. And there was an explosion in this refinery ahead of them. And they figured, well, that's probably changed our day. They weren't affected by it directly, but they got on the walkie-talkie or whatever and learned that they were needed to be reassigned and they should turn around and come back.
Mm.
But the guy tried to turn a van around inside a refinery on a bluff on a road that was too narrow for the move he was trying to make. And he said it was like those movies that you must have seen where some car or wagon or something is dangling on the edge of a cliff and there's a close up of the wheel going around and around and is it going to fall off or isn't it? And he said, you know what? I thought I'm in the middle of this van. I'm not near a door or window. There's no getting out of this. If this thing tumbles, I'm going to die in one of three ways. That's why I thought of the crisis center. I could either die of blunt force trauma inside a van, or it could burst into flames and I could burn to death, or I could drown inside a waterway inside an oil refinery. He said, these were my options. And he said, damn, I'm in the crisis center.
Yeah.
And and then he said, and that's what happened. And he said, he called his guardian angel Tinkerbell
Hmm.
from Peter Pan.
Hmm.
He said, Tinkerbell did a great job. She yanked me out of my body before whatever happened to me could happen.
Mm.
I wasn't even in it. And I said, I never even found out what my cause of death was because who cares? I died in a car crash of something. And he said, but she yanked me out of my body and she sat me next to this road inside the refinery. And she said, listen to me now. Do you understand that you are safe and you're here with me? And he said, I absolutely do. And she said, your body's over there, and you can look over there if you want to. And he said, no, thank you. And uh, she said, your body got you through a lot of things, but it couldn't get you through that.
Hmm.
But you're safe and you're here with me, and we're going to stay here as long as you like until you give me the word, and then we'll leave. And he said, let me see if I got this straight. If I want to, I can sit on a road inside an oil refinery for as long as I want to. She said, that's about right.
Yeah. Can we go to Hawaii?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or could we stay on this side of the road
Yeah.
inside an refinery? We sometimes bring the funny ones forth because funny people die,
Yeah.
and they bring their sense of humor with them. And he said, well, sure, let's get out of here. So she took him to some place where he could kind of regroup, and he didn't need to be there very long because he could take himself so lightly.
Hmm.
And he wasn't mad at the world that he died. He just died because he was in an accident. He didn't fight that, and he was ready to move along. And when we helped him, he said everybody in our family was named Anthony. It's like we couldn't think of anything else to name a child.
Right.
Tony or Antoinette or Tonette, and we twisted that name and turned it into masculine and feminine, all kind of forms. We'd all get together and somebody'd say, "Hey, Tony," and everybody jump up. And so he said, so when it was time for him to cross, he said, I'm not getting one of them. I'm not getting one person. I'm getting all of them. I'm getting my whole family. And he said, they're not exactly solid and they look a little bit like they're floating. And so we ended up calling them the floating Anthonys. And he referenced that circus family, the Flying Melendez.
Yeah.
That would have been before your time too.
Yeah.
But it was the circus family that did trapeze acts and stuff like that, and they were all had the last name. And he said, "Well, we're getting it's like they're all the Anthonys, so they're the floating Anthonys." So they came for him, and then he met Saint Anthony, the real dude. He said, and he's really cool.
Yeah.
He said, "I met the real guy, and he's really fun." Saint
Oh,
Anthony of Padua.
yeah.
So anyway, his story is in the third book. Please let me explain, because he just had a gift for language and explaining complicated things.
Yeah.
And
That's
he also
wonderful.
said that his family, somebody said to him, "Tony, what the hell are you doing here? You're too young."
Wow.
And he
Wow.
had to say, "Well, you can die at any age," and I
Sure.
died young. And then they said to him, he said, the truth is, I was trying to avoid you people because you fought all the time." And he said, "And now we're all together." And one of his aunts or somebody said to him, "Well, you're going to like it here because we all understand that we can't annoy each other for all eternity. It's just not allowed.
That's
It's,
great. That's great.
if we want to be here and we want to be together, we can't do all that nonsense that we used to do."
Yeah. The Floating Anthony's is a great softball team name too, I think. You should if you ever join a
Maybe they'll
softball
have
league.
one. I
Yeah.
don't know what they're doing now. Maybe they're doing that.
That's great. And have you, is there anything in particular that you have learned from this work that you're doing from these souls? Is there anything like how has it changed you?
Well, one thing is that it I just took beliefs that I was instructed in all the way back to about 6 years old. I made first communion at 7, and in those days you had to learn to go to confession and you had to be ready to receive communion at
Right.
7.
Right.
And so some of this is really old in my understanding, but I always believed that I belonged to the whole of everything. I believe as an American that we're supposed to be United States, and I'm trying to be as united as I know how to be
Hmm.
with people that want to fight each other,
Yeah.
and always score points against the other team and wait for the next election and we'll get you.
Right. Right.
I really do believe in the unity of the universe and that God loves everybody all the time, and that religions might have particular claims and ways of thinking about things, but God's loving everybody all the time. And I get lots of Muslims and people from all over not lots of people that haven't any religious affiliation who I end up, you know, helping out. So unity is real important to me. Truth, that I try to check. One of the mottos of the Dominican order is simply veritas, which is the Latin word for truth. And right now, we're so embedded in narration of things on cable channels and stuff where people even know they're not true, that it isn't true while they're saying it, but they're saying it because it's what their tribe says. You
Hmm.
know, well, we just have we've really suffered the loss of a sense of truth being independent of your opinion or what your group thinks. And I've watched that that's really detrimental for people in the afterlife. If they believe things that aren't true, or they exaggerate something all out of proportion. So what if it's true, but you're letting it be the entire show when there's a
Right.
lot of other things that are important also, like poor Hal.
Right.
Okay, so what? Yes, you didn't buckle your seatbelt, but is that your entire story forever?
Right.
Is there's more to you than that?
Right.
So anyway,
Multiple things can be true at the same time.
exactly,
Yeah.
and that it's important to change.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you need to have this ego thing where just because you've been a certain way for a certain time that you must do that ever after. Uh,
Right.
be willing to change. That's important.
And what would you tell it- or how do you guide individuals to make peace or, you know, have closure in relationships after their loved ones die? Sometimes it's more difficult than for some than others. And what guidance would you give on that?
I would say for one thing, check your work. Do you believe it's true that people live after they die? Even people that go to church every Sunday, I do retreat groups,
Hmm.
and on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, people who will show up at a church because there's a special speaker from out of town. That's me.
Hmm.
So it's already a subset. Lots of people would never be seen at church on a Monday.
Hmm.
But so it's this subset that's already there, but I'll make them put their heads down like they're in kindergarten. And I'll say, I'm going to do 10 to 1. 10 is the strongest. If you always, every minute of every day, believe that you will live after you die and you will be you and have your memories and have reunions, then you're at 10. So I want you to raise your hand when I call the number 10. Thank you, tens, and that's usually about a quarter of the room. Then I'll say, okay, what about 9? But 9, almost all the way there, but not quite. You know, have them pick their right number, and I say, don't lie to yourself. And everybody's got their eyes closed. I'm the only one looking, so you're not trying to press anybody.
Right.
And usually, I'll get by the time I get to about 7 in a Catholic group like that, about 80% of the room will have raised their hand.
Hmm.
But then there'll be some that are absolutely at 5 because it's a toss-up, and they might say, "How can we know?"
Hmm.
And then the irony is that almost unfailingly, there'll be the lowest score in the room will be the woman who had the key to the hall who came to start the coffee.
Mm.
It'll be somebody that's at church all the time, but their idea about this is not very strong in their imagination. And so it's harder when they suffer death of loved ones and stuff because it's just hard to imagine that they really can hear me or that I'll really see them again or anything like that.
Right.
That's been a surprise.
Mm.
And I would like people to, if they could you at least do the thought experiment wherever you would land on that spectrum, could you try to push the needle a little toward hopefulness that
Right.
what if it is true? And I don't think it has to be a religious question necessarily. It can be a physics. It's really about what is a human person, and are we more than our anatomy? Are we more than our physiology? Is there something to us that's deeper than that? You see some of it just by getting older.
Hmm.
I don't have the same color hair I did when I was a child.
Right.
I'm still the same guy,
Right. Right.
except I'm sort of the same guy, but not the same guy because I've had a lot of experiences that have changed the way I understand myself. And I will after I die. I'll bring with me all of this and whatever is between here and my grave. But then there'll be a next version of me after that, and after that, and after that. And we're already living that way.
Hmm.
There's already been several iterations of you by the time you get to your current age. It's
Right.
just going to keep going even after you die.
Right.
But you can also get stuck if you just insist on something and being stubborn about it, even if it isn't true. And so please don't do that.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you want to mention or that you would want listeners to know?
Well, I just believe in the cosmic happy ending. I believe that it doesn't matter how old you lived to be, how your death occurred, whether your dreams came true or they didn't, whether the world around you thinks that you were a success or a failure. All of those things they're important to a point, but they're not of enormous eternal importance. If you're I believe that the universe is made of love, that God is love, not just lovable or loving, that God is love,
Right.
and that everything that comes from God is love. And I think this is just a school of love. We're here for a while to learn how to be more loving persons, and we can grow in our capacity to love and keep doing that until your last breath.
Yeah.
You can do that, if you're paralyzed, you're sitting in a sick bed or whatever, you can continue to try to receive love, magnify love, and give love away.
Yeah.
Uh, my earliest education was in gerontology, so I used to be around a lot of elderly people and aging, and some of that would be in healthcare settings with people that weren't going to get any better. And I've been around a lot of that, and I've just thought if that ever happened to me, I want to be a source of joy for everybody that comes in my room.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
there's no reason that this can't be the most peaceful, joyful place in the complex.
Yeah.
Because I saw it. I used to have to visit and go down the hall giving communion to people or popping in on people that I didn't even know. And somebody would be delighted to see me and all inquisitive about how I was and who I was and all. And then I'd go to the next room and they were just all cranky and and sometimes the cranky one wasn't as sick as the happy one.
Right.
That really that ability to engage people and go out of oneself in interest and care and concern is a spirit matter. And I would I try to cultivate that and try to be the joyful friar that I claim to be because that's the name of my podcast.
Right. Right. And do you feel like we have, I agree with you that God is love, and the whole point of being here is to love and to give love and to receive love. Do you feel we as a society have gotten further away from that, or that there are just louder voices in the room?
Well,
Or have we just sort of maintained throughout history? Like,
I've only been here for 69 years of history, but
sure.
I've only lived in one country and only speak one practical language.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know. I mean, when I was really small, when I was in the first grade, the whole world could have blown up.
Hmm.
The Cuban Missile Crisis was happening when I was in the first grade, and the bombs were pointed right at us. And I was living on the Texas Gulf Coast in a series of oil refineries. And I
Hmm.
remember hearing on the news that we could be one of the first targets. So that was when I was 6. So the world was already a fraught place, and
Right.
both of my grandparents and parents, fought in world wars and had a Great Depression in between the two. There was lots of suffering in the world when I arrived in it. So I try not to be too big, make too big of a deal out of what I think is the kind of the low grade state of conversation in the United States at the very least. I just
Hmm.
feel like we can do a lot better than this. We can be united and we don't need to be so strident and oppose each other so strongly. That matters to me. And I'm a Catholic, which means universal,
Right.
and uni means one. And and I live in a community of people, and I know how hard. I mean, I've lived with roommates my entire life. Anybody out there, have you had perfect roommate situations forever and ever? Living
Sometimes I
with,
can't stand myself. I mean,
but
like,
that's the thing. So I just believe the world is a unity, a union of love, and we can of course, we have to work through differences and things, but we don't need to do that with dualistic thinking. That's one idea that's really important to me. Is the universe a unity or a duality? Am I different from you or am I like you?
mhm,
Well, I just met you. We haven't even met in person. We're just looking at each other on a Zoom screen. But I feel a oneness with you because we have common interests and we haven't explored very many of them.
mhm,
We've only been talking for 45 minutes or so,
yeah.
and mostly about what I do. But even when people rub us the wrong way, or when they're a different gender, color, race, religion, sexual orientation, any of it, I still think we can find oneness and we don't need to look that hard. It's really kind of right in front of you.
Yeah.
Uh, and the same thing with it's kind of the ecosystem of, living with the other animals and care of the earth.
Hmm.
It belongs to all of us, not just the humans. And and that there's a oneness to all things that just seems to me self-evident. And can't we just live in that and engage each other with respect and listen to one another and laugh together?
Hmm. It reminds me of what you were saying, how the guardian angels were talking and saying, "Do you want to experience this for the rest of eternity?" Right?
I've eternity, yeah.
Yeah.
One of them, my best friend is a priest, and we were vacationing together at a rented house, an Airbnb or one of those. And it was in August, and the Little League World Series was on TV.
Hmm.
And I'm just an Astros fan. He's a Boston Red Sox fan, and I was watching the Astros on my laptop. He's watching the Red Sox on his iPad, and, and the Little League World Series is on the wall. And and I did a crossing, which is what we call them. And I was on a Zoom call with some of my prayer partners, and the guy came through, and the guardian angels often talk first just to get us started,
Okay.
and we invite them to do that. And the guy, I said, "Well, what would you like us to call you?" And he was moving through me, and I said to my partner, "Oh, this one's got a sense of humor. He wants you to call him Jake, but not from State Farm."
That's great.
And he said, when he did get to talk, he said, "I've been here with these men, and their dog. That we kind of it's his dog, but he's my favorite dog, so I kind of share ownership in this dog. These men, they watch baseball almost incessantly, one on this little screen and one on that one. They watch little children on the wall, and it doesn't matter what baseball they're watching, it gets interrupted at regular intervals by Jake from State Farm. And he's under the misapprehension that everyone that he meets wants to know about the insurance that he sells. Anyway, he just said, just call me Jake, but not from State Farm.
That's really funny. Wow.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Who would have thought any angel would want to go by that name?
I'm sure this question you could talk about for hours and hours, but if you can give us the Reader's Digest version, what do most people get wrong about being in the priesthood? Like you just said, you went on vacation, which like I'm not sure people think like, oh, priests go on vacation, but like,
Oh, well, one must be that we're lonely.
mhm.
And I was at a reception yesterday for a priest that was leaving his pastorate after 4 years and being transferred to another place. And so with this big emotional outpouring and gifts and a party and everything. And I was at the mass, and then I went over and I was at the party, and I thought, I really want to go home. I hardly ever just, make my way to the front of the food line, but as soon as they blessed the food, I was the first one fixing my plate. I did the best I could to be polite, and then I got out of there.
Yeah,
I sometimes I'm around people so much that all I want is to go home
yes,
and have some alone time. And so I don't think I'm any lonelier than the rest of the population. But sometimes people will project that and think, oh, you've given up family and spouse and all that. Well, yeah, but I have a happy life.
yeah,
No complaints here.
yeah. I feel like you're constantly surrounded by people as a priest.
Really all the time. Yeah.
Yeah,
And sometimes you have to learn early some appropriate self-care.
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
where the fact that you're a priest doesn't mean that you're on call all the time. And actually, I have to coach people some people are very spiritually sensitive. I was talking with a lady the other day who hardly leaves her house because when she's in crowds, spirits attached to other people bombard her.
Oh my gosh.
There are people that are like that just can't get a break. And I just was coaching her into shielding prayer and ways in which to not allow that.
Right,
You don't have to allow, just because people want a piece of you doesn't mean you have to give it to them.
right, right.
And I told her when I was first ordained, the church I worked in, we lived above the store. The bedrooms for the priests were above the secretaries.
Hmm.
So the church business was going on all the time, right in your house.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a garage, there was only a carport. And on my day off, if I stayed home, people would want to talk to me and they'd be told, well, he's not available today. And they'd say, his car's out there.
Oh my gosh.
I demand to see him on his day off.
Right.
Well, I had to learn that no, I will keep office hours, and you can keep office hours if you're contacted by spirits. While you're fixing dinner, or while you're driving, or you're putting the kids down,
Yeah.
you don't need to be dealing with some ghost.
Yeah.
They can wait a while,
Yeah.
and
They can wait a minute.
they can you can work that out. You can have a prayer corner of your house. When I'm over here, that's when I'm available. There's other ways that you can do that, but you don't have to deal with that 24/7. And you
Yeah.
don't have. And if people want to say you call yourself a priest because you didn't do what they wanted the moment they wanted it, I'll say, as a matter of fact, I do. So do other people. Lots of people call me father.
That's great. What do you enjoy most about this work that you do?
Watching tragedy turn into triumph. Just knowing that that's a universal law, that everything that's lost gets found,
Hmm.
uh, broken hearts mend. When people have big disappointments in their life, I didn't have the athletic talent that I wished I'd had.
Hmm.
I was growing up as a guy in Texas where being an athlete's a real big part of the manliness of growing up, and I was scrawny and I was the guy that was arranging the buses so that you could get to the football game.
Right.
I was the student council president guy. I would have really liked to have been the quarterback. I've tried to say to people, you know what? None of us are guaranteed an outcome, and we can have a dream of what our life might be, but you'll only make yourself unhappy if you insist that you're entitled to that. Can you hold your life a little gentler than that?
Hmm.
Can you just be grateful for what you have and be grateful for the next thing you have, and can you be of service where you are, and bloom where you're planted? Can you be a positive force for the good wherever you are? If you do that, I think you'll have a happy life, even if you didn't get to have a baby or you didn't get to be the quarterback, right? You
Right.
didn't have a lot of money or whatever it was that you thought was really important. There's opportunities that are out there for you if you don't don't. I had one person that in the first book that was mad at the world because she died while her children were small,
Mm,
and, and she was stuck because of that. And they were trying to say, well, let's get you up and moving and let's get you some new purpose. And she said, she wanted to curse and say, I didn't even get to finish my last purpose.
mm,
Well, that's a heartbroken person, and you can stay heartbroken for a while. But I tell people, I'll be a compassionate listener. I can help you heal, but I won't commiserate. If you just want to partner in misery, which is what the word commiserate means, misery loves company,
hmm.
I'm going to say goodbye now.
Right.
If you'd like help moving from misery, give me a call.
Right.
But I don't want to just stay and be miserable with you.
Right. Right.
It's not
You
this.
you were not the crisis center.
No, not that. Well, I've had to tell counselees that, and I had to learn that sometimes the counselor needs the one to be the one to say, this will be our last appointment.
Hmm.
And what I do now, if we get to the part where people contact me, if anybody cared to, I think of myself as the tow truck driver,
Hmm.
the stuck souls thing. I will do one appointment with a person to help them get unstuck, but I won't follow them down the road.
Hmm.
Not going to do weekly counseling sessions with someone. If you need that, that's near you. You can
Right.
find, if you look for it, you'll find it.
Right.
I'm not that guy. I might be able to be somebody that can coach you a little bit for an hour, listen to you compassionately, pray for you, and maybe even get some inspiration that might help you. So I don't mind doing that at all. I love doing that.
And what would you say to your younger self after all of your experiences? What would you say to your younger self?
Well, thanks for hanging in there.
Mm,
Um, I don't ever, I mean, I just had my 40th anniversary, so it was one of those occasions where there's a photo display of, all the the past and some of it childhood. And I'm grateful to be 69, and I sometimes look at little kids and think, I'm so glad I'm not you.
yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to be here 16 more years.
Right.
This has been hard. I mean,
Yeah.
I've loved my life, but I think it's difficult too.
Yeah.
And I just don't approach my life that way. I just think of it. I enjoy the anticipation of what might be next, but
Hmm.
I don't. If I had to talk to that little guy, I just say, do the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Would you mind saying a blessing for folks who are listening or watching this, whether they're Catholic or not? Just a blessing for people listening.
Okay. Well, when I do that, the Catholic way of doing that, we cross ourselves, and people probably have seen us do that, or they've seen the guy that just scored the touchdown do that, or they hit the home run, or even whether they're Catholic or not, they
Right.
might do that because it's my mom taught me that when you cross yourself, you're making an X over your heart,
Hmm.
and that's where the treasure's buried in the
Hmm.
pirate stories. The X marks the spot where the treasure's buried. That God is inside you already, because that's the rules. God's everywhere, and you're somewhere, and God's inside you.
Hmm.
And so when I talk to God or give a blessing, I want people to know that it's coming from inside them and not from outside. So, loving God, embedded in each one of us, ask that you touch the heart of anybody that's listening to this podcast, and especially if there are any places where someone might be receptive to light in the darkness or a new idea that might bring freedom and healing, that each person here welcome that new energy as best they're able. And I ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And
Christ, by the way, is a Jewish category. It precedes Christianity.
right.
It's older than Christ. It's a it it means to be anointed of God. That is, be a royal, to be a royal citizen of God's kingdom, and that applies to every last one of us. That every last one of us is God's prince or princess.
And how can people find you? All the varied
Right.
ways, and we'll have it in the show notes, but how can people find you?
The simplest is the website, which is my name. It's Nathan, Nathan, Castle, Castle, Nathan-Castle.com. If you go on there, there's a contact button where you can, a drop-down menu will ask for a little bit of information. I like to know what time zone people are living in because podcasts go all over the world.
Right.
So I'd like to know if I tried to reach you, I don't want to do it in the middle of the night, wherever
Right.
you are. And I really prefer brief conversations rather than emails. So if a person will leave me their phone number, I'll text and say it's me. Do you have a moment to talk? And try to answer questions briefly. On the website, up in the right-hand corner, are the social media icons.
Hmm.
The one that's most important, I think, is YouTube,
Hmm.
because I have a YouTube channel with lots of video and classes and things, all of which is free. I do some things that I ask a donation for. My first book, I don't know if you can see behind me on the
Hmm.
wall. Can you see the book that it's Antoto to the Wizard of Oz?
Oh, yes. Hmm.
My first book is on the Wizard of Oz, and because Wicked is so popular right now, and we're about to see part two and at
Yeah.
about Thanksgiving. In August, I'm doing a Zoom class that I think I'm going to contain it to about 100, but it'll be over 2 weekends in August and some time that people could do kind of workshop things in between, using the Oz story as a way of looking at your own life. Uh, and the themes in it about starting out at home, she's an orphan. Like, why is that? You know,
Hmm.
and wanting to everybody wanting to be at home somehow or feel whole, feeling that they're not, there's something they lack. That sometimes we believe that the only way that ever be whole is we find some wizard that will fix everything,
Right.
uh, and that he doesn't come to us, we'll have to go to him. It's the opposite of the gospel.
Right.
Anyway, if you're interested in using the Wizard of Oz story as a way of looking at your life, that's coming up in August. And then I do a lot of retreats and seminar stuff that you can find that's posted on the website.
That's great. I think also, if I can just offer a suggestion for this, which you're not asking for, but a great pair of shoes really makes a difference in your life.
Yes, and don't go for a long walk in new shoes. That's not a good idea.
That's very true. That's very true. Well, thank you so much. This has been an incredible conversation. I feel like we could have talked a lot longer. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your gift with us and a blessing with us. And I just really appreciate it.
Well, if your audience wanted me back, all you have to do is ask. There are some podcasts that I've been on in a recurring way, and that could happen if you wanted to.
Wonderful. Excellent.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay. God bless you.